Oh,
Good everything. Hello there. Hi.
hey, good everything. Good everything. How are you, Professor Hunter?
I am so awesome. I got up this morning and I'm happy about that.
How about that? That is the key. That
I
is the
mean,
key.
for some of us, some people don't want to get up in the morning. And for that, I say, this is a strange time and it may feel daunting and it may feel hopeless and it may feel like what the F and I can't understand where we are right now. How am I having a harder time or a similar time that my grandparents had? How is that possible? But to me, and I know you share this sentiment, these are exciting times because amid this chaos and manure, we can plant some seeds and build some things and make the world a little bit better. And I'm excited about the possibilities. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, y'all were on fire yesterday. I got a chance to listen a little bit as I
oh,
was traveling down here to Columbus, Georgia, you and Rod. And so uh glad that you delved a little into Christopher Rufo.
I'm gonna and thank you for that. Those of you who are not yet part of the Sirius XM family, Urban View mornings, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they're
Yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah, no
So
question.
yesterday, you had Ajua on, and
Yeah,
she
because the only reason we're sitting here, Ajua, our sister,
Ajua,
no question.
yes, and thank you to her again. I can't thank her enough. But when she
Yes.
brought yesterday, I said, "Oh, okay." She dropped something on there. I was like,
Yeah, yeah. It's time to fight. It's beautiful.
I didn't
It's
consider that people were moving like that, and I kind of had to know that because
yeah, no
we
question.
move like that. We move like that. So I said, "Okay, yeah." Everybody that's in a position to do some
That's right.
things,
That's right. That's right.
tangle those wires, make them untangle those wires. Don't make it easy.
Exactly.
Don't
Don't
make
make
it
it
easy.
easy. How, wait, was that? I forget. Was it Al? I forget his last name. But what was his song? Show and Tell. Just a game I play when I
Yeah.
want to say I love you. So why don't y'all come try to find it? Show and tell. We not telling y'all everything. You must be crazy. You think we go? I love it. I love it. We look. It's beautiful though.
The
Yeah.
other thing I'm not amazed by, but I'm very pleased. There are so many people who you would think they haven't figured out, but they're in a position of power, or whatever, who are now coming in to like, okay, what can I do? And I'm like, but you're already in a position to do what you ain't been doing something. Okay, all right, here's a job. Go do this. It's
Yes.
like I'm good.
Yes.
I'm handing out jobs too. I love putting people to work. So
Yes, you do. You got an army, and the army is
let's
growing.
let's
And this is the period when people realize that we need an army. And it's a beautiful time, really. It really is. Nobody, no one should be discouraged. No one should be depressed. Now that we do need to be sober and sensible and thinking about it. I mean, and we also need to stop dealing in make believe. Perhaps this time we can maybe get back to a level set. Enough of people who need our sympathy, need our love and compassion, but do not need our support and foolishness, and certainly don't need to be leading anything. Shout out to Snoop, Doggy Dog, and Rick Ross and Soldier Boy. And these are people who are part of our community. They need our love. They need our John Henry Clark, who is from here, and we're going to talk about him in a minute. Dr. Clark was being interviewed by Listerville Middleton, who is from South Carolina, where I was last week. And he asked him, he said, Listerville said, Dr. Clark, I ran to this young lady and she said, I ain't no African. I don't want nothing to do with Africa. I hate Africa. I'm an American. And he said, what do you say to a young person like that or anybody like that, black? Dr. Clark said, well, the first thing I would do is cry. And he was like, because this is a person who is sick. And I'm sure there are people right now, including members of our family in Narrative and Nubia, who might say, well, why would he say that? Why would he say she was sick? Because her mind has been his mind, or any of our minds, has been so severely underdeveloped. I don't really hold any rapper to a standard that they have not communicated in their work. So the only thing that Chuck D and Calvin Brodus have in common, Snoop Doggy Dogg, is that they're both black men and they both practice a craft that has been labeled as rap. But when you listen to their content, Carlton Rittenhauer has never recorded a thing in his life. that said that ends ain't nothing but hoes and tricks, or bees ain't no. And so for a man to stand in front of an audience of white nationalists and vomit the same word that the ancestors of these white nationalists labeled him with so that they can sing along. Well, this is a man who is sick, so I will weep for him. But what I will not do is listen to anything he has to say in terms of the vision and direction of our people. And I don't mean like, broke clock is right twice a day. That doesn't make you a leader. So I'm sorry, sir. You and a man who was named for another man who helped traffic drugs in our community, Rick Ross, a man called Soldier Boy who said that Barack Obama can suck his penis. Well, good. Maybe you can have that vision. You have nothing to say to me except I know children listen to you, so I'm going to use you as an example, even as I cry for you momentarily. Because then Dr. Clark went on to talk about how you would educate the young person. But this is a beautiful time to be alive because maybe we can throw some of this foolishness in the trash where it belongs.
Yeah, and they're both over the age of 50, which mm, I want to tell. So I confessed on Monday that I realized it doesn't take long for your mind to addle.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so last year, I was committed to reading books, but I realized this week that I've been listening to books. Now I've read books and of course a lot of articles, probably enough articles to fill books. But the novel reading, which is the thing that activates your humanity, I've been listening because I've been walking. So I finished a TV series called Siloed, and I'm not recommending because the way it ended, and they're doing another couple of seasons, but I'm like frustrated because I want to know how this thing ends. So I went to get the book series, and I didn't realize it was 3 books. So I downloaded the 3 book series into my Kindle, and I started reading Dr. Carr, and I couldn't get through a chapter. And my mind was wandering, and I was like, wow, if you don't use it, it is a muscle that you can lose. And I know that's foreign to you because you read every day.
Absolutely foreign, but familiar
Yeah,
because
I
I
said,
live in the same society you do. We live in this society of moving images and sounds. So if I don't read every day, I can get pulled into a thing where I can't think
oh
because
my,
yeah, putting words in your head through your eyes creates a different type of
oh my God.
work. So yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So I was concerned because I'm an avid reader. Like
Hmm.
I'm not a passive, I'm like an avid reader. And I'm sitting there and I
And
was
an avid writer.
and an
You deal
avid
with
reader.
words, no
Sure.
question.
And I'm sitting there, I was like, ma'am, you can't get through a chapter. I'm like, look it out, look at the birds. I'm like, wait a minute, wait, what happened in this book? So I force myself every day now. So I got through 1 and then 2 chapters, and now I'm like, I'm back. And it took a minute though, but I was just thinking about people who never read novels in particular because it's
Oh,
stolen focus, and that was a book that you gave
yeah,
a couple of
Jonathan
years ago.
Haidt.
No,
Yeah.
no, Horace,
Heart,
Jonas,
heart,
Johann Horace.
heart. Oh, Horace. Okay, I
Horace.
thought it was heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but see, the thing is, most people know that book now who are listening to us in conversation because you have constantly evoked it and described it and engaged it, and that is a central value of this space.
But
7 days a week.
yes, but you dropped that, and he talked about the power of reading novels in particular, not just nonfiction, because a lot of us can read nonfiction, and we're into the history and all that. But the novel touches you in a place that allows you to have more empathy and humanity. And I love reading novels just for that. Your mind, because we are only here because of someone's imagination. Somebody imagined freedom when there wasn't freedom. That requires something, right? That's a make believe, right? And people are like,
Mm,
oh, I don't want to read. Like your entree into reading was through comic books, which your dad called them funny books,
funny books,
Yeah.
funny books.
But those are the things that allow a young person in particular, but even older folk, to imagine a world that's not here. And we're going to need those skills right now to imagine a thing that's not here. And if we don't have those, and it's a skill. And I realized it was a skill this week when I lost it for a minute. And I was like, wait a minute. So I just wanted to again thank you for not just
Of
encouraging us
course,
to read, but for us
of
to have a
course.
community of readers, and also the vulnerability to even admit that to yourself that you don't read enough. And so I'm going to fix that because I can. We can't control a lot of the stuff that's happening. You call this Hell Week, and it was. I can't even believe it. It felt like a year. This has
Oh
just been
yeah,
a week of this.
no,
It's only been a week. Oh,
and we're just getting started.
oh my God.
It's a glorious time, really. I mean, it's very rare that we can say that we are living in a moment that marks a major shift in the life of the species. I think perhaps certainly the late 1960s, well, certainly from really certainly from the mid 1950s through the early 1970s was such a period, but it was different because it was on an upward trajectory. The anti-Vietnam, the Black Power civil rights movement, the international movement, 1968 being a key year in that globally. The kind of dying colonialism that led to the independence movements in Africa in the 1960s and the Caribbean self-determination movement. So there's that period. In the United States, of course, the Civil War before that. But this period is very different. Um, we talk a lot. Malcolm talked about it. Du Bois wrote about it a century ago. The crisis of and the end of white supremacy. It may very well be that we are here, and that is that's a responsibility that Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer and Miriam Makeba, you name it, all over. Abdiasios Nascimento in Brazil, or Rosie Douglas in the Caribbean, who didn't get a chance to Walter Rodney, they didn't get a chance to be present at a moment and be able to intervene, but we are standing on their shoulders and we have their momentum. The sick philosophy, the sick idea of dominance is at a moment. It's been at a moment of crisis since its inception, but it is now perhaps at a moment of potential resolution or a major leap forward in resolution. It is not on an upward, our, the upward trajectory of white supremacy, which global white supremacy, that is, which in many ways had peaked with the two internecine family fights that very pretentiously European and European ways of knowing have labeled world wars one and two, which are really intra-European family fights, which are continuations of similar, not in scale, but in sentiment fights in the 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, 16th century, 15th century, the age of Europe. In many ways, the peak of that centering of Europe and its colonies was the consolidation of the most powerful, the most influential, the most centered, and at once the most addled and fragile of its colonial projects, which would be the pan-European stew poured onto millions of indigenous people and then enabled by millions of Africans who could not then be terminated. That stew called the United States of America, that was in many ways the pinnacle of white world supremacy. Don't think in terms of countries, think in terms of ways of knowing, think in terms of global social structures, think in terms of trying to stitch it together with cultural meaning making that is very dissimilar from each other, but then is stitched together in its moments, the cultural meaning making of the group that we would call the Greeks or the Romans, the cultural meaning making stitched together from the Gauls, who we now call the French, the cultural meaning stitched together from the forest regions, the Franks that we would now pour into fairy tales or, European fairy tales, or stitched together through the islands that collectively we refer to as England, and then injected with others that we would call Iran or Irish, stitched together in a process of movement and memory into a concept called Europe, or a concept called Western civilization, or orienting us in time and space. That has always been a fragile project that has been bound together more by who it says it is not than who it is. But think about where we are now. Persia, the age of European empire, the age of Europe, the age of Europe and its colonies. Think about it on its downward trajectory, which in many ways was accelerated after so-called World War II, as because of the fight between Europeans and the attempt to revive what Frantz Fanon would call a dying colonialism by turning to the offspring of Europe, which would be the colonies in the Western Hemisphere, more specifically the United States of America, the criminal enterprise settler colony known as the United States of America. Think of what happens in the wake of World War II as the crack in the foundation of an already fragile project called Europe. And as that social structure in perpetual crisis because it has been being perpetually resisted by human beings since the first time somebody set forth to hit somebody else on a large scale. Think of it as the moment when the various governance formations of people in the world, many of them poured into state formations that we then label as if we can use them reliably, not even reliably, use them exclusively. Things like labeling something China, labeling something India, labeling something Russia or Brazil or South Africa. Footnote, Donald Trump, Spain's not in the BRICS. Not that it matters, because you, my friend, are a means to an end. Steve Bannon has a means to an end. Our common humanity has a means to an end. Elon Musk has a means to an end. And you, sir, as your brain continues to deteriorate in the skull, whatever's left of your brain, you know, you're not a funny clown, like funny haha, but you are a tragic clown. And your presence is a signal to the world, to the people of the world, that it's time now to be serious. It's time to, put away the rappers, put away the ball players, if not completely put them away, certainly displace them from having any commentary that we should be thinking about and listening to as we face now, perhaps, hopefully, which is why I'm ebullient this morning at George Washington Carver High School in Muskogee County in Columbus, Georgia, which I'll talk about as well in a second, which is why I'm ebullient about it. You may be the generation that gets to see, that gets to participate in the destruction of white supremacy. Imagine that, friends. Generations of people, generations of indigenous people displaced, generations of Africans drug in chains into a hemisphere to enable that white nationalist project, generations of people who become white because driven by fear. They have been told that it's either your whiteness or your life. Imagine humanity liberated because finally, this system, which has been in perpetual crisis for 5 centuries, has seized enough of the ground to give its final death bleat, not in an arc of decades of problem, but in one final death bleat. It's a beautiful thing if we can seize the moment. I'm sitting this morning, just for a few minutes here, at the George Washington Carver High School in Columbus, Georgia. Last night, we had a virtual community ritual where we watched a conversation between Lister Belt Middleton and John Henry Clark, which I mentioned a moment ago. And today, in just a little under an hour, we are going to open the Southern Regional Conference of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. Many of you know about that because I've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks, really since the beginning of this calendar year when we were down here on the 1st of January. And there's a virtual component, by the way, if you go out there and search Southern Region of ASCAC, ASCAC Association, you will find the link and you can register virtually. Um, but there are also a number of people going to be here in person. And so they're actually setting up down the hall. And we're here because we are going to spend the day talking about, exchanging ideas on how to learn from and forward the lessons learned from the life and work of John Henrik Clark, who was born in Union Springs, Alabama, a stone's throw from where I'm sitting, who was raised between Alabama and Georgia, including going to Spencer High School here in Columbus, Georgia. I spent late last night just for a few minutes riding around in Columbus. Shout out to my brother-in-law, Randy Fuller, uh, just as good a human being as you can have in the world, who graduated from Spencer High School. He's from here. And went on to Tennessee State where he met my sister, Gussie, and they got together, and the rest is history. He, in addition to just being a brilliant brother, incredible character, testament, he and his family, of course, from here. He also played sports. He was a all-star football player at Tennessee State, went on to play in the National Football League, a defensive back, played for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Seattle Seahawks, the Atlanta Falcons, other things. And Randy um, put me in touch with Sister Rosa Patterson, who is the principal at Spencer High School. And so glad to know that she and perhaps some of her teachers and students may come through today, because we are at Carver, but Dr. Clark went to Spencer. And Spencer was the first high school here in Columbus, Georgia, for Black children, first public high school. If you wanted to go to school, high school in the state of Georgia, you know, no public high schools for you. And this was as late as the 1930s. That Clark was born in 1915, January the 1st, 1915, Union Springs, Alabama. But if you wanted to go to high school, no choice for you in terms of public high schools. If you had a chance to go to school, there were high schools, some of them still exist at HBCUs in the state of Georgia. So you could go to Morris Brown, you could go across the state line to Tuskegee, and that's what the children of African people in this region who had a few pennies to rub together would do. They would send their children, but for the vast majority of Africans, there was no option. John Clark attended Spencer because they had just opened it. And so I'm looking forward to Principal Patterson or one of her staff and students coming through here at George Washington Carver at some point today to bring me, and thank you, Randy, again for making that connection, to bring me a Spencer sweatshirt, because I'm sitting in George Washington Carver High School and grateful to the principal, the staff who let us in this morning before dawn to set up for the conference, because, I had to rep my Carver, because I am in Carver, George Washington Carver. So I'm repping Carver. When they bring me the Spencer, sometime this afternoon, probably before I speak, I'll switch out to the Spencer, because I am one who believes, oh my God, I believe in Black institutions. Donald Trump, it's finished, baby. Where did you go to high school? Oh, you didn't. Well, you graduated from one. You actually graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. We can't be defeated. Those who think that this is a dark time should reflect, which is what we're going to do in part today, on what our ancestors did. Because one thing I love about being in Columbus, Georgia, is I was riding around last night and drove by my aunt Carr, my mother's sister, and my uncle Aaron's house, which I hadn't been on that street in nearly 50 years. Looked up at the sky, no street lights, and saw every star in the sky. You think we could be defeated? Last poet said, black is the color of the midnight sky. Black is so beautiful, it'll make you cry. I was there looking at these stars, looking at that porch, and across the street at an apartment complex where black men were encircled an oil drum with a fire that was twice the size of the drum coming out the drum, and music playing in the middle of the night. And I thought to myself, you really think that somehow you're in control, Steve Bannon and Elon Musk? Oh, my friends. As Louis Farrakhan once sang in the 1950s, oh, my friends, it's easy to tell. White man heaven, black man hell. Yeah. Well, if that's the case, is the inverse also the case? White man hell is a black man's heaven? Is white supremacy's hell African people's heaven? I think the answer to that, if we study history, is yes. The crisis in white supremacy, Gerald Horne talks about all the time for decades. Actually, wrote an article about it back in the late 90s, early arts in a journal called Socialism and Democracy. The name of the article is The Crisis in White Supremacy. And then a couple of years later, he published a little book called Blows Against the Empire. And his latest book is out. I'm going to talk about that in about 5 minutes. I got my time wrong because we're not going to be here long this morning. But as I said, I'm George Washington Carver this morning. And shout out to Brother Chris who let us in. So I'm walking around in the building with Dr. Reba Kelsey, who is the president of the Southern region of ASCAC, whose parents are here. People have gathered. We all came from Atlanta. Dr. Mariba Kelsey is here. The presiding elder at 99 years old. Again, this is the area that he's from. His wife, Mama Niambi, of course, from neighboring Alabama, like my people are from. And between now and the time we go back to Atlanta, I hope to go by again the cemetery where my grandparents are and where my Uncle Aaron and Aunt Carr are. Their remains are because I just left their house. So this region is very, very special to me, but I'd never been in the George Washington Carver High School building. Spencer, where that Clarkman School is the oldest school for Africans in this state, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, in the 1930s. But George Carver, which was created in the 1960s, has no less a rich history. And Carver and Spencer here in Muskogee County and Columbus, like the great black high schools around this criminal enterprise that is falling. It's a beautiful thing, really, if you stop to think about it. It will be pain. We're going to talk a little bit about the pain, but ultimately, to every birth, it's blood. Every black high school in the country has a similar history in this regard when it is led by, populated by black people, not just black students, but black teachers, black administrators. The George Carver School, its initial principal, Mr. S.P. Charleston, has a statue in the foyer. Stop playing with black people, you clowns. S.P. Charleston, I stood there this morning looking at that statue and thinking about a man that was born in 1904. Mr. S.P. Charleston. Some of y'all in here on the YouTube side and the narrative Nubia side, a lot of Nubians coming today, by the way. Ran into a couple in the lobby at the hotel in Phoenix City last night, in fact. But some of y'all from this region, so you knew S.P. Charleston. S.P. Charleston was the first principal of George Washington Carver High School after it was opened in the 1960s, and he served until from 1963 to 1970. Mr. Charleston went to school in Georgia when it wasn't no public school to graduate from for high school students. So he went to Morris Brown for their high school. Imagine that. Morris Brown College. Y'all gonna stop playing with black people. The only school in the Atlanta University Center named for a black person, the second bishop of the AME Church. And S.P. Charleston was a faithful member for over 70 years of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. His father was an itinerant preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. See, what you white nationalists have confused, my friends, confused. You've confused Christianity with Christian fascism. You've confused the gospel of Jesus Christ with your race hatred, which you nurture like a child, don't you, you little apartheid punk Elon Musk with your Nazi salutes that the Anti-Defamation League excuses, because if you study the history of the Anti-Defamation League, from Abraham Fox to Jonathan Greenblatt, its current leader, you will understand that there are agendas that transcend our common humanity. So it comes as no surprise to anyone who knows the history of the Anti-Defamation League that the Anti-Defamation League would give a pass to an awkward gesture by an open white supremacist who's supporting a neo-Nazi political party in Germany, among other things, and who had as his invited guests to the swearing in of the criminal enterprise on Monday, a leader of the Alliance for Democracy in Germany, the neo-Nazi party that he is supporting to topple the German government, who invited leaders of the right-wing parties of England and the Prime Minister Maloney coming as the invitation of Elon Musk. So you confused white Christian nationalism with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Fortunately, the Bishop of Washington didn't. And so S.P. Charleston was a member of a church that actually follows the gospel of Jesus Christ, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And he went to the AME school in the Atlanta University Center, Morris Brown College, where he went to the high school division. And then he continued and got a degree from Morris Brown College. Then he continued and got a master's degree from the Atlanta University, of course, now known as Clark Atlanta University, as you know, Baba Omatosho, Dr. Black, Daniel P. Black, of course, the faculty there. They're not like us. You don't, come on now. Let's talk about it. S.P. Charleston continued graduate training at Tuskegee University. So underneath my Carver shirt, Here's my Tuskegee shirt. I'm not playing with these people today. I'm sleeping. I slept last night, will sleep tonight in Alabama. Come across the bridge to Columbus, Georgia. Oh, let's dance. Because you're not ready. You don't even have feet to dance. Well, I shouldn't give anybody an invitation to dance who can't dance because you don't even have any feet to dance. You white nationalists. You're not Christians. David Walker told you in 1830. You're not Christians. In fact, you are advocates for the devil. And when you are a true Christian, if you have the ways of knowing that undergird Christianity, because we know, as John Clark taught us, as he said many, many times, that the Abrahamic ways of knowing, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they are African exports, but somewhere along the way, particularly Christianity and Islam, adapting to the cultural meaning making of groups that were contentious and it ultimately became anti-African, they turned into what John Henry Clark called male chauvinist murder cults. My talk this afternoon is entitled John Henry Clark versus Everybody. We'll talk more about that. But S.P. Charleston took the helm at George Washington Carver. And when you think about it, the first year of George Carver High School, it was accredited by the Georgia Accrediting Association. And if you look at the history of George Washington Carver on their website, look up George Washington Carver High School in Muskogee County Public Schools, and you'll see that it reads that according to the original plan, that the school be expanded to accommodate the needs of its students. The ninth grade was added in September 1956. After they added the ninth grade, the first year of high school was accredited by the Southern Association of Secondary Schools, SACS accreditation. Shout out to Christopher Rufo. An affirmative action promotee, an example, who thinks somehow that he has figured out how to displace the intellectual work of millennia of human beings, particularly Africans, by waging war on critical race theory, a man who can't spell it if you give him the three letters. A true example of affirmative action. I'm not talking about equity programs for non-whites. I'm talking about the only affirmative action that should be evoked when you're describing the last 5 centuries of white supremacy, and that would be the logic of whiteness. Chris Rufo, when you read him, you will see just how unremarkable he is. But Rufo has been busy. On Monday, after the swearing in, he met with part of the education team that is advising the Trump administration because their job now is to engage this war on woke. And as Rufo has written and has said in interviews, it is not it's no longer just billionaires funding them doing this and legal challenges. Now they have control of the apparatus. The call is coming from inside the house, and it's a beautiful thing. The crisis in white supremacy is now hitting home, and we may be at the moment, the point of inflection, where they finally tear it up in a way that reveals to us that we have always been in charge of the things that we can control, and we can control the education of our children. These Black institutions that came into existence during the age of US apartheid, the era that Elon Musk, who was born into an apartheid system, yens for, the era that Christopher Rufo thinks somehow he can create by shoving his propaganda down the minds of our children. Footnote, it will work if you don't have your children read. But of course, it won't work because we're going to make sure that that circumstance doesn't come to pass, because that's why we're here Saturday after Saturday. That's why we're here 7 days a week in one form or another. That's why we engage in this intellectual work, because we're going to make sure that we roll over that like the sea as well. The schools that came into existence during US apartheid, schools like the one I'm sitting in now, led by Mr. Charleston and the women and men of his faculty, the school that started with a staff of Mr. Charleston and 15 teachers and a student body of 379 students with only 2 grades, 7 and 8. Once they add the ninth grade, the school was accredited by the Southern Association of Secondary Schools. Christopher Rufo wants to take over all the accreditation bodies in this country, wants to destroy any notion of global consciousness through study of the peoples of the world in the way that will certainly affirm our common humanity. He wants to destroy it all by labeling it all CRT, and from kindergarten to 12th grade in the United States, root it out in the curriculum and in the universities. Turn faculties into informants, turn college presidents and boards of trustees into cowering punks. And this is a moment for heroes, my friend. And many will not respond to the call. They will attempt, as the Ivy League is already beginning to do, even within the last week, to capitulate. They will attempt to self check. Oh, but all the African has to do is remember, regain the momentum of memory. We face nothing compared to what S.P. Charleston and the women and men of the faculty of George Carver High School faced. 1960, George Washington Carver High School's hymn, chant, and creed were written by Mrs. Helen Burnett, a former media specialist at the George Washington Carver High School. Mr. William Monroe wrote the music for the hymn and the chant, former band director at George Washington Carver. And those two represent so many others around the country. Y'all know I live in the DC area. I mean, live and work in DC. So you know how many times we've talked about the great Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School, but there's a Dunbar in Chicago. There's a Dunbar in Dayton, Ohio, not just a Dayton, not just a Dunbar in Washington, D.C. There's a Paul Dunbar in Baltimore. There are George Washington Carvers all over, whether it be Memphis or Muskogee County. And those exemplars of our greatness continue to this day. George Washington Carver High School, this school just won the Georgia football championship for its division. Of course, they celebrating here to this day, and that's a beautiful thing. Also understand that the minds that can memorize football players are also the minds that memorize music and mathematics. I'm in a math classroom right now at Carver. And that the momentum of our memory reminds us that we have mastered not only subjects that are present in the contemporary curriculum, but we are the ones who invented the subjects in the first place. This is what John Henry Clark always reminds us. In fact, if you look at this particular book, New Dimensions in African History, this is John Henry Clark and Yosef Ben-Yakin, and the dynamic duo. Dr. Clark, in this book, most of this book, the second half of this book, is a reading guide for the study and teaching of African world history. People are always asking for curriculum. I found this very interesting. There are, as someone, I don't know that there's anybody that I am aware of, certainly not in my age group, who has collected and studied more curriculum about African people than me. And that's not by way of bragging, it's just a way to do two things. On one, level set in terms of why I'm saying what I'm saying, I'm about to say right now. And number two, it's a way to evoke all the people who poured into me, many of whom will be here. We're coming into this building right now while we're all together. People have done rites of passage, spent some time last night with Baba Bernie Gorman, and just sitting there, Baba, Baba Boykin, Jerome Boykin, Bob Malefi, just sitting there talking about the work they did in terms of rites of passage. And Dr. Adams, Kat Adams, who will be presenting today, Kathy, interviewed Baba Derek Jackson about their work around rites of passage in South Carolina, the Columbia, South Carolina area, also with the great ancestor Joe Benton. The people who poured into me about how to study this, including, and we talked about last night when Dr. Clark came down to Columbia to Richard Allen University for the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations International Conference back in this would have been 1993. And we got caught in the ice storm down here and had to stay the better part of a week after the conference was technically over. And just being in community, that question of time, which I'm going to come back to in a moment as well, the question of how you spend your time when you have unrestricted time, not time distracted by these devices, not time distracted by moving images, but time when you just sitting up in a hotel across the street from an old AME HBCU where you've just gathered for 3 days and now you got 3 more days because you can't go nowhere and you just in community thinking with each other. That is the vision 2025 as we out here navigating in these streets, in these Nubia streets. We must gather so we can spend time together. That's what we do. People say, well, all this studying is good, but what are we going to do with it? Let's go to that sentence. All this studying is good, but what are we going to do with it? I challenge the idea that we're studying at all. I'm not saying we're not aware of certain things. We're not studying. Why? Because we would act differently. See, study informs action. Consciousness precedes unity, as Malefi Asante used to say, borrowing from the intellectual thrust of Kwame Nkrumah, who spent part of his formative years, this Ghanaian, in the United States of America, in New York, in the old Edward Blyden Society, which was also known as the Harlem History Club, with John Henry Clark in Harlem, in the same building that ultimately, a generation later, a young Lou Alcindor, soon to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, would visit as he became a student of John Henry Carr. Consciousness precedes unity. So we're doing all this studying, but what are we going to do with it? I challenge the idea that we're studying. We're not. Because if you were studying, your action would be different. Your action would be very different. You're not studying. You're aware of some things. And John Clark, as we talked about last week, John Clark would often say, I talk about the books I'm reading, I talk about the things that I'm studying, and I give you citations because, not because you're going to read it, but because those of you who want to read it, those of you who want to study will have the opportunity to do so in a shorthand. I'm giving you these things that I've studied, not because I'm right, but because I'm studying and I want you to join me. But most people won't accept that invitation, whether because life is very busy and we can't make the time, or because when we do have some time, we're turning on the television. We're finding ways to avoid study, not even consciously, because we're being socialized to do that. That's the kind of thing that can produce millions of people that will follow a fool. And so, as I said, New Dimensions in African History, the back part of this collection, which is John Henry Clark and Yosef Ben Yakinen, who were together for several days in 1986 as the minority ethnic unit of the Greater London Council, London, England. They were invited to give a series of lectures, which are now compiled in this document. But the back end is Dr. Clark's outline for how to go about the study of the African world. Donald Trump on Monday with his Sharpie, signing a stack of executive orders that he did not read. Part one of a four-pronged Project 2025 was the document where they told you what they were going to do, the crisis of white supremacy. We may be near the end. So in their desperation, they're not even hiding it anymore. We're not studying. Why? Because Project 25, I know all about that. But what are we going to do? You don't know all about Project 2025. Because if you did, you would have acted differently. Aya Fubara and Nellie tried to walk you through it. Professor Hunter and I tried to walk you through it. Tried to walk ourselves through it. We had to walk ourselves through it first. So when I say John Henry Clark versus everybody, the first struggle we have is against ourselves. We have to fight the abyss. We have to fight the distractions. We have to regain our time and our focus from where it is being stolen. So the first war you have is an internal war. When I'm going to talk this afternoon about John Henry Clark versus everybody, the first fight was himself, how to get out of that field in Union Springs, Alabama. How to live up to the label that the governance formation that he was born into, who Africans are to each other, put on him from the time he was old enough to walk, where they called him Little Fess, Little Professor. They aspired for him something that they had not seen themselves, intellectual work in a formal sense. And when John Clark family came across the Alabama state line, which is almost where I can point to it right down here, came across into this region just outside of Columbus, Georgia, and eventually ends up at Spencer High School in a new building that was so new they didn't have a cloakroom. So he's holding the materials that were given to him by the people who were responsible for bringing a speaker that day to the building. And in holding this man's coat and materials, one of the things teenage John Clark held was a book by the great Afro-Puerto Rican book collector and scholar. Footnote, people want to fight Fat Joe. Fat Joe is white. He's a white Puerto Rican. He don't know about the birth of hip hop. Hip hop. And Mellow Mel said, "Fool, we were in the Bronx. Everybody was there. They speak Spanish, English. I don't know. I was there. You were not. And Fat Joe, I ride with Fat Joe. I'm saying that because Fat Joe's Puerto Rican. And yes, there are white Puerto Ricans. Some of them voted for Trump, and they effed around, and they're finding out now what that means, because one of those executive orders he signed had to do not only with immigration, but with withdrawing support for these minority programs, including the Spanish-speaking folk in the community, or the Latinos, or what may be called Hispanics by the federal government. My point, though, is that Fat Joe is a Latino. Fat Joe is a Puerto Rican. Arturo Schomburg is a Puerto Rican, a proud, visible, and vibrant and vocal Afro Puerto Rican. And the materials that John Clark held that day in the early 1930s in Spencer High School included a book called The New Negro by a son of Philadelphia, Elaine Locke, edited by Elaine Locke. And one of the essays in that book, The New Negro, was written by Locke's friend, fellow member of the American Negro Academy, Arturo Schomburg. The Negro digs up his past. And young teenage John Clark reading that essay while he's holding the papers of a man who is speaking at Spencer High School, the new building of which is right down the street, right down from my auntie in them house. John Clark's imagination was fired in Muskogee County. He said, I have an aspiration. So the idea that, and that leads ultimately to leaving the South, catching trains and ending up in New York. And the rest is history from 1933 when he enters New York to the end of his life in 1998. John Clark, who doesn't have a diploma from Spencer High School, but nevertheless matriculated there. John Clark, who by the time of his retirement was a professor and the founding chair of the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies. Stop playing with African people, the games of division. Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, where Karen Hunter was on faculty for years. Professor Hunter was on faculty for years. Recently at Hunter College, Sonny Sanchez was honored, who taught there as well. That sentiment that propelled John Henry Clark out of this region to the world came because of the aspiration of people who didn't have a chance to go into buildings like this. People like Mr. S.P. Charleston, who ended up being the principal, the first principal of this school. Stop playing with Black people. So when we think about what Dr. Clark did in terms of study, this is a great book to kind of revisit. The framework is there in terms of curriculum. It's what we've been doing here in Narrative and Nubia for the better part, 3/4 of the last half decade. It's what we've been doing Saturday after Saturday after Saturday after Saturday here and in class for 5 years and counting. And now at the moment of the crisis of white supremacy, perhaps about to be resolved with its collapse, the momentum of memory means that we not only stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, but we now must prove that we have listened to them. And if you haven't listened to them yet, it's never too late. It's time to open the ears, and perhaps we'll be driven to it. And so today at George Carver, sitting here, I've been thinking a lot about what we have to do. And I'm kind of winding this up because since November, it's become increasingly clear that F around and find out is what people are doing. But as our brother Mike Harriet reminded us in his on his platform, his latest platform, in fact, the one that he's been thinking about and working toward for many years, Contraband Camp. I love his essay. I love Mike, your essay that you just wrote. They F around, we find out. Well, let me just spend just a couple of minutes here and then we're going to wrap again because people are gathering now. Shortly we'll start to level set these conversations that I'm kind of throwing some things out this morning because again, as you said, Prof, the title of our conversation today is Hell Week. Hell Week, for those of you who found yourself subject to some form of teenage and early 20 something calisthenics and forced community, sometimes known as pledging. You know, Hell Week is the moment that you enter just before you cross. Uh-oh, am I frozen?
Yeah, your face is frozen, but your voice isn't.
Okay, very good. That's
All right,
good. Oh,
yeah,
here we are.
you're
Yes,
back.
good. Okay. And then maybe everybody may be logging on now because, I'm on the school Wi-Fi. I said I'll save a few more in my data phone. But yes, Hell Week is what happens when you, just before you cross. So you've learned all the history, you've met all the members of the sorority or fraternity, you've gone through all the rigor of building community with the people who are on your pledge line or whatever. And now you're in the week just before you cross. You know it's Hell Week because the thing just got real. Kind of like America.
Hmm.
It got real. And now, but here's what you know, because guess what? Every iteration of people who have joined this thing that you are now joining went through Hell Week. Meaning what? You know there's something on the other side. See, y'all playing with black people, Steve Bannon, you disheveled millionaire white nationalists. Y'all playing with people, Elon Musk, who has a form of intellectual palsy that is so irrepressible that it bursts forth in the enthusiasm that he exhibits, whether it's jumping on a stage with his belly showing in Western Pennsylvania before an act that may or may not ever be revealed for what it was or wasn't, involving an assassination attempt, to the palsy, the cultural intellectual palsy, the hubris, which is attributed, a word attributed to the Greeks. And then, folks looking for excuses for the subsequent to the Greeks, you have the Romans. And so it was a Roman salute, except you can't find it in the history of Rome, friends. If you study the history of Rome, that salute is a much more recent vintage. Although once it is attributed to the Romans, you have people who would consider themselves modern day Romans, like Benito Mussolini, giving the salute as a fascist. It's a fascist symbol, my friends. You can't save them, Jonathan Greenblatt, even though we understand why you would try if you know the history of Jonathan Greenblatt. But the point is this: Hell Week is what you enter just before the dawn, just before the revelation, just before you receive the offer and the inclusion of membership, just before everybody who's been through Hell Week before you embraces you. And guess what? The Pattersons of the world, the John Clarks of the world, the Ella Joe Bakers of the world, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, all those people are standing on the other side of Hell Week to embrace us once this fever breaks, and it will break. They're moving at warp speed. So thinking about that, and let me just put a footnote here because I'm not going to mention this right now, except in passing. Don't worry about this. Remember last year, actually, it was summer before last, I was reading Jonathan Ives' book on Martin Luther King. And I said, when Dr. King's files are revealed, there's going to be a crisis for some people who are easily caught up in distraction, because those FBI files are going to reveal things that anybody who has read anything about Dr. King, certainly if you not only read Jonathan Ives, you can go back to David Garrow, Bearing the Cross, you can look at Taylor Branch's work, you can look at Dr. King's own work, you can read Ralph David Abernathy's memoir, and you can say, okay, you already know much of what they're going to reveal in these files. So then the question is going to be, why are you even looking at that? Donald Trump is signing to release the JFK files because probably of his friend Robert Kennedy Jr. But the Martin Luther King files are being released, will be released, updated the release because they're supposed to be released years from now. But the updating of the release date is for one purpose and one purpose only: to get you to turn on Martin Luther King. And those of you who would turn on that, and in the same breath defend vile, lyric spewing, anti-black hip hop artists, oh, you Negroes got some soul salvation to do. But like John Henry Clark, I will cry for you, even as we then move into the corrective, because the crying don't last always. We now got to set you straight. But now back to what I was saying. The moment we're at is easily understood if we study. This book just came out. This is Gerald Horne's latest book. It just came out a couple of days ago. African Americans and a New History of the USA. This is Gerald Horne's latest book. And what's interesting about this book is it is not a new book. When you look at its 16 chapters, it is the introduction of 16 different books that are of the nearly 40 books that Gerald has written. These are the introduction chapters. And what he's doing is, when you read them together, Chapter 1, the dawning of the apocalypse, the roots of slavery, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and capitalism in the long 16th century. Chapter 2, the apocalypse of settler colonialism, the roots of slavery, white supremacy, and capitalism in 17th century, North America and the Caribbean. So what he's doing in those first two chapters is erasing the idea that we should start any of our memory in 1619. Now, John Clark would start our memory in antiquity. Gerald is not against that, but his focus is on the last 500 to 600 years. And what he's doing is revealing something I've already said, but I'm going to tie it now to where we are as we kind of begin to think about this in context. What Gerald Horne is reminding us is that we should not think of ourselves as African people in relation to any of the criminal enterprises that came together to call themselves Europe. Certainly not picking sides into which European we identify with the most. A 1619 project says, I identify with the English. A project that goes back to the 16th century say, I identify with the Spanish first, or I identify with the French first, because they precede the English, the Portuguese, or the Dutch. We identify with it. No, no. Gerald's like, don't identify with any of these people. All of this is visiting, as John Clark has said many times and written many times, the sores of Europe onto the world, which means even the people in Europe, the vast majority of people in Europe who had nothing to do with it, are being drawn into a criminal enterprise by a tiny group of people. Elon Musk has predecessors. It's always been a handful of petty tyrants trying to run the world. The technology improved. That's the major difference. And the crisis of the 21st century will be the same as the crisis of the 16th century. Understand, white Christian nationalism is not new. At its beginning, it was called the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
And the Portuguese and the Spanish fighting each other, internecine conflict, as John Clark used to say. And this is one of the genius moments of John Clark. It's one of the reasons why he is a model for so many of us. And listening to him last night reminded me, as I was telling Reba, I said, it reminds me of how much of Clark is in my thought and speech. John Clark used to say that the Portuguese and the Spanish are fighting each other on the seas. West Africa, then Brazil, then the Caribbean. They fighting each other until finally he says, the Pope says, you two good Christian nations, stop fighting each other. You are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people. 1619, don't do that. Or do it. But understand that there is study that now must increase our awareness of the fact that you shouldn't be picking sides in an internecine conflict that it has one goal, conquest, that has one framework and social structure, empire, that has one driving way of knowing, and that is whiteness, that didn't exist. The first fascist Christians were the Catholics. And then they have internecine conflict because what comes after that? The Protestants. This internecine European conflict in the Church of England, Henry VIII said, I'm not bowing down to the Pope. Y'all go bow down to me, the Anglican Church. Christian nationalism is not new, friends. So Gerald then goes on. I'm not going to go chapter by chapter, but I'm going to mention some of the books that he's writing about. So we did the first two chapters, which kind of takes us into the 15th, 16th century. Then he gets into the 18th century with the counter-revolution of 1776, the introduction to that book, and then how Africans began fighting back in the late 18th, early 19th century, Negro comrades of the crown, then confronting Black Jacobins about Africans in the Spanish-speaking community and the French-speaking community, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, then how Africans, after the conflict known as the Civil War in the United States, continue that fight for liberation in Latin America and the Caribbean, his book, The Deepest South, the United States, Brazil, and the African slave trade. Then how these Europeans try to take Africans and put them in the Pacific, including places like Hawaii, steal those captive Africans after they've lost the Civil War and extend that criminal enterprise into the Pacific. Gerald's book, The White Pacific, U.S. Imperialism and Black Slavery in the South Seas after the Civil War. How Africans made solidarity with the Spanish-speaking communities, including the indigenous communities that are south of a fake-ass border. And that's Gerald's book, which becomes chapter 8, Black and Brown, African Americans in the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. Also, if you want to also combine that with the conversation that we need to have today, because as Gerald Horne would tell us and has written, and as so many others have written, when you see somebody like Donald Trump and his friends, Stephen Miller, this creeping around the White House, as they vomit their white nationalism by saying, we want to make sure that no immigrants are in this country. John Henry Clark, again, the lyricism of John Clark is so powerful. John Henry Clark once said, these people who came here in a criminal act, they have been here long enough now to have convinced themselves that they're the indigenous people and the people who were here when they got here are the immigrants. Think about that. I got up this morning to come here 4 days in the morning, got on the elevator to the hotel. As I was coming down the hall, doors started opening. It's about, 6:30 a.m. The doors are opening, and these cats are coming out of the doors with boxes, empty pizza boxes, with hoodies on. None of these cats were over 5'6". You know who I'm talking about, right? On the back of the hoodies are the names of a construction company. They're coming out of these buildings, these rooms, these hotel rooms, 2 and 3 at a time. These are the people who are working. These are the people the Bishop of Washington was looking in the face of this criminal and his little scruffy beard, president in waiting Manchurian candidate friend, who's trying to recruit his wife into clowning the Bishop of Washington. But Usher Vance is looking straight ahead, looked like in that same damn beam that Doug Emhoff was looking through. I'm not listening to you. And then she kind of slightly looks away. Because see, Usher Vance is Indian. And junior varsity, with that little bit of what I guess passes for a chin that you're trying to mask with facial hair, collapses into his neck, keeps trying to. Lama's like, can you believe it? Can you believe it? Usher's like this, looking sad. Then she just looks away. Now, I don't know. She may be in the same right with them. She may be closer to Vivek Ramaswamy, who said he's going to run for governor of Ohio after they put him out. Thanks, Chief. Bye-bye. Anyway, the point is this. Maybe she's with them, but at that look on her face at this moment almost was like a, is this worth it face? Because the Bishop of Washington, in a very soft voice, is saying the people who clean, who pick the food, the people who do that work. I saw those cats coming out the hotel this morning, 4 in the morning. You think I'm gonna ask them for papers? And if you think any decent human being is gonna do it, or you think any decent human being is supposed to narc on them to somebody else, as you were talking with Rod yesterday, or you think people just gonna tell on people? Oh, my friends. Oh, my friends, there will be some people who try to go for the okey doke, and as you all mentioned yesterday, ain't gonna get no check, but there are gonna be many others who don't. Yeah, you can bust up in Newark, but guess what? The mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka, ain't no punk. Our friend, Prof. Hunter, yours and mine, and many others, our friend Ras Baraka ain't no punk. So he released a statement. We not helping y'all. Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, going off. Now, mind you, politicians not our friend, but understand, politicians can't fix everything. But understand, as Donald Trump says, I'm gonna get rid of FEMA. If a hurricane comes or a fire comes, yeah, let the states handle it. Okay, fool. Weather don't recognize no barrier. No problem. No problem. Get rid of FEMA. No question. And then New Jersey, then California, then Massachusetts, then New York State, then Pennsylvania, then Michigan and Maryland, then perhaps in Illinois, they can say, can we have our money back? Why? Because most of the violence that weather now visits on the globe in this place you call United States of America, yeah, most of them people are in those states that voted for you. So can we have our money back? And the hillbillies who go and find that the eggs are now 50 ass dollars an egg. Well, what are we gonna do? Can you eat the whiteness, my friends? So Gerald goes on, and again, I won't go through all of these. He's talking about how global white supremacy manifested, and what he's doing is helping us reframe in a way that John Clark did very much so. So, what happens when you read this whole book? I will read from one of the original things in the book. This is the end of the foreword, where Gerald Horne says, "So, what lessons do we draw from this centuries-long exploitation in the context of settler colonialism, then imperialism?" He writes, first of all, these are the lessons to learn. Mind you, do not skip the study. Don't go straight to the lesson. See, this is what happens. People will watch a video, even like this one, repeat what they heard on the video and count that as studying. Some people call them the YouTube scholars. You didn't study. You repeat what people said. There are no priests involved in this. We're not the bishops of Washington or Georgia. We are simply people engaged in study and in conversation to inspire to do the same. And then if you're inspired to do the same, office hours Monday night, I'll be sitting right back and we'll be having to continue the conversation in terms of ways of knowing, cleaning it up and moving now to the fourth conceptual category, science and technology. So we're going to continue to do that that's where we have that conversation. We're studying. When we're going to act, then study. Watch some stuff, repeat it what somebody says. Don't repeat what I say. As John Clark said, don't repeat nothing he says. This is just a series of, as Professor Hunter, as you would call it, breadcrumbs. He says, first of all, what should we learn? This racialized minority, African people in the United States, has been compelled to be in the forefront of class struggle, a legacy of enslavement, where this locomotive of history reached its most dramatic expression during the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804. Unfortunately, this militant solidarity at times has been mischaracterized insultingly as, quote, identity politics. Christopher Rufo, you punk. Let me not call you a punk, because I understand, brother. Brother Rufo, as Cornel West would say, and you see Cornel West has been as vocal now as he was before the election. Cornel, Where are you? Anyway, point is this. I know you got a radio show on KBLA and you're out there and that's important, but yeah, I don't see you out there, okay, Kamala, you can't use the target of Kamala anymore, can't use genocide Joe anymore, even though I got some real good friends, as Gerald would say, on the left who continue to try to say all those executive orders, it doesn't matter because Joe made it possible. Okay, y'all really going, you know what? Don't even go, it's a distraction. But my point is this. The question of identity politics that Rufo, that Bannon, that insultingly and sadly, uh, the brother who's a minister out of Detroit who bucked his eyes and jumped on the floor of the Capitol like it were hot coals on his feet while he did a bad imitation of Martin King. Really wasn't an imitation because you're a minstrel, sir. At least that was a minstrel performance. And Vivek Ramaswamy and Byron Donalds and others Byron Donalds, a grown ass black man, referred to Donald Trump as his father. Daddy's home. Byron, you said it. I ain't say it. Now, Ajua was setting natural fire to you. I saw her do it one night, the night of Juneteenth. But, it's all good. I ain't got no shade for Byron Donalds. I weep for you momentarily as John Clark weep for that young girl that this is Middleton evoked. So, but they would all refer to what we're doing as identity politics, as Gerald says. Not identity politics, it's militant solidarity with oppressed people. It starts with African people, but it becomes something that is global, even as I think it was AI generated, but it doesn't really matter. Even as the image of these black women sitting on a skyscraper sipping tea as they watch the flames, but remind yourself of what Mike Harriet reminded us of the other day. They F around, we find out. Guess what? You're sitting on the top of a structure that it will be consumed by the flames itself if you don't act very differently. There's no time to sip tea. There's a time now to get involved. Second, Zero writes, settler colonialism as it was launched in the 1580s in what was termed North Carolina depended upon class collaboration among the invaders. The mixture on this land of class struggle and class collaboration has been often a volatile, contradictory, and eclectic mixture, with the hopeful trend of class struggle at times gaining the upper hand. Reconstruction, the New Deal, the 1960s, perhaps today, while at other moments its antipode has prevailed. What is Gerald saying there? John Clark said it in a way that was just poetic. He says, at moments in the crisis of white supremacy, when the rich whites, the elites, in Gerald's interpretation, the class, the upper class people, the Elon Musks of the world, the billionaires who sat on the stage behind Donald Trump as they looked at their property, try to air kiss his Marshall friend who had some kind of derivative Zorro hat on to ensure that he couldn't get at her chin. But at any rate, as they sat behind him, the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses and the Musks, as those people feel the crisis expanding, they then put out front puppets, MAGA Muppets like Mike Johnson, puppets like Trump and Vance, who Peter Thiel and Elon Musk made sure was there just in case Trump's brain completely explodes or implodes or he goes off script. Those people understand that they can't seize the political apparatus except that they fool people. And what Gerald Horne is saying here is that this question of race doubles as something that enables that tiny class to continue to foment its agenda and force it on the rest of us. And John Clark had a beautiful way of saying it. John Clark would say, in those moments of crisis, when they feel themselves being threatened, he said, blood calls blood. And somehow blood always answers. So Gerald Horne and many of us hope for that solidarity. See, y'all effed around. Now you found out, Hispanics. Yeah, see, you people ain't got no health care. The man signed executive orders. You remember those price caps that Biden Harris put on? They're gone now. Now your mama can't afford her insulin. Oh my God, what'd you say? You hope then that's going to drive them into class solidarity? John Clark said blood somehow calls blood and blood somehow answers. I remember, this just happened. Tuesday, after the Klan rally in downtown DC, where Trump leaves the Capitol, rides down to the arena, Capital One Arena in Chinatown, starts signing these things he ain't read, pardoning criminals, 1,600 almost, these January 6 people. And then the leader of the Proud Boys, now that he's been exonerated and out of jail, not exonerated, pardoned out of jail, he says, now I want retribution. I want the president to give retribution. Yeah, that's what's coming. The weaponized whiteness. Then he says January 6th should be Patriots Day. Don't flinch. When it becomes Patriots Day, and maybe he'll wait a year, maybe he won't. After the Big Macs clear his system, which I guess they don't really kind of clear up your system, clog up your system. Maybe as he's sitting on the toilet one day, maybe it's already happened. He decides that he's not going to wait till January 6, 2026. He's going to give the medals out before that. And then it's going to be the next conniption fit by those who are easily distracted. Just give them the medals now because the crisis of white supremacy is reaching resolution. This is hell week, metaphorically and literally, and you shouldn't get caught up in that. But the point I'm trying to make here is John Clark would say sometimes blood calls blood and blood always answers, meaning what? When the white nationalists get in trouble, they make the death bleed, and by the millions, they come to the polls and vote for their avatar. Meanwhile, we in here arguing about STEMI checks and who got a pardon, and oh yeah, and now we are finding out. Gerald finally says how this apparent contradiction will be resolved may seem unclear to some, but those with understanding recognize that, as used to be said by our comrades in Southern Africa, victory is certain. Hell week comes and then you cross, you see? So don't get caught up in hell week. Understand there's something on the other side. Like John Clark always reminded us, Gerald Horn is reminding us to always see our struggle in an international, in a global context. Descendants of slaves, we're going to weep for you, dry our faces, and continue to clear time and space because you are better than that. We are better than that. Not we, America. That's unsustainable. That's going to fracture. History shows us that empires fall, and this one is no different. What I'm talking about is the human spirit and the capacity to develop the intelligence through critical analysis to understand that this is not the time to wrap yourself in the flag of your master. Now, if you want to wave that flag to keep people off you like the Africans did during apartheid, that's fine. We know cosplay. We engage in it every day. We know what it looks like. You start singing the Star Spangled Banner, people put their hand over their heart before they thrust it out. No, put their hand over their heart. What is Donald Trump doing? He doing this. Why? Because you're a clown. Don't get distracted by the clown. Reading and study precede consciousness. So whether it be this week in Georgia and Alabama, whether it be last week in South Carolina, was with Kat and the folks who are teaching down there. While I was there, I was thinking about how we were at Claflin University last week in this conversation. And I was thinking about what we were doing, which was taking lessons, developing the conceptual categories to apply to whatever is being discussed. And shout out to all the teachers who joined us on last Friday and Saturday and Sunday in Claflin, 3 days, to talk about how to take these conceptual categories, which make the Africana Studies framework, which is essential to doing this work as we jailbreak the Black University, to apply it to these other courses, any courses. We talked about Afro-Latin studies, we talked about the Caribbean, we talked about US history, world history. How do you use these conceptual categories to go into those other areas as well? So as we did that work, had a young lady who teaches Arabic at Claflin. How can we use the conceptual categories in that space? The humanities generally, religion generally, as we were doing that work and realizing, teachers realizing in conversation that these conceptual categories can and should be applied to every way and course of study. It was something that was a good preparation, that in office hours Monday night, for coming here this weekend as we continue in our efforts to navigate in these streets to talk about John Clark versus everybody, which is where I want to stop for a second. Back here, remember we were here at the beginning of the month, Dr. Melvin Owens, Reverend Dr. Melvin Owens, who's president of Alabama State Missionary Baptist Convention, gave a sermon on January the 1st, Emancipation Day, here, everywhere in the United States, where he preached from Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. And again, as I said then, I'm no Jeremiah Wright. I ain't even thinking about he is the model though. But I heard Reverend Dr. Owens give a metaphor. In that metaphor, the idea was that these Hebrews came into Egypt not to stay, but you look up over several centuries and they're there, their numbers have multiplied, and many of them are in positions of authority or managerial positions. And you can't tell, as Dr. Owen said that morning here in Columbus, Georgia, at St. Mary's Road Presbyterian Church, you can't tell the Egyptians from the Hebrews. Here we are in a moment, Hell Week, where you can't tell the people who think that they're part of this thing from the people who aren't part of this thing. And we are in a moment where we have to be crystal clear that there was something before this settler colony and there's going to be something after it. And the thing that is constant is every human being who's in it. And the only people who are crystal clear about it consistently are the people who want to keep everybody else believing that their first fidelity should be within the four corners of this criminal enterprise, because that's what allows them to benefit. So this is a struggle. Opposition to that struggle has to be grounding. On this Sunday, Fred Gray, as we talked about last week, and thank you, the great sons made sure that I was correct on the date. It wasn't last Sunday, it's this Sunday. It's tomorrow for those of you watching in real time. If you've passed this, the National Portrait Gallery has a portrait of Fred Gray being unveiled. Fred Gray, who left the state of Alabama to go to law school at Case Western University, said, "I'm coming back to destroy everything segregated." The brilliant Fred Gray continued to swing with both fists. Reverend Fred Gray as well, ordained minister. And the portrait of Fred Gray is already hanging in the National Portrait Gallery. I made sure before I left DC to go down there and stand with it for a moment, because in the narrow hallway, when you come in the National Portrait Gallery and you make the left past the information desk, right there, you'll see the portrait of Fred Gray on this wall, on the near wall. And then you look, and not 2 paces across is a portrait of the clown, because he's been inaugurated now. Verses. This ain't Kendrick versus Drake. This ain't the verses of COVID. This ain't the moment when, remember when the verses shifted? I'm talking about that a little bit this afternoon, just in passing. When the sisters got involved, and instead of being like, this my best song versus your best song, it became they sang each other's songs. See, it's funny how Africans put those ways of knowing it. It took the sisters, it almost always does. And at that point, you see, hi. But of course, the commercial enterprise ain't gonna make no whole lot of money about people singing each other's songs. So we gotta get back to this Dipset versus the Lox. So, okay, it's very nice. But the point is this: you look at that hallway, Fred Gray, Donald Trump, two opposing things in time and space. And I thought about something one of my law students said last week as we sat after the inauguration and conversation. And the essence of what he said was that ultimately you exhaust the limits of a thing by testing it. Fred Gray and that generation tested the limits of the possibility of the American experiment. And when tested, that experiment convulsed, expanded for a moment, but the whiteness at its heart called it back in. John Clark says, blood calls blood. Somehow blood always answered. These people who are driven by fear, because after leaving the National Portrait Gallery, I went to get a bite to eat, and I'm sitting in a diner across from Ford's Theater. And I'm looking at all these people with their MAGA Scullies on and their MAGA scarves on and their MAGA jackets on. People who, as I'm listening, I realize most of the people in this diner, this cheap diner that I come in sometimes, not because I can't eat somewhere else, because I like listening and ear hustling who people coming in. Most of the time it's workers for the city. Most of the time people who live and work in Washington, D.C. But because MAGA has flooded here, now all the people who came to town for inauguration, and these people, as I'm listening to this hillbilly horde, I'm realizing that these are the people you sold out, Trump and Musk. These people, you took up even the jumbotrons. You took them up off the mall. They done spent money they didn't have to get here. They done marched around in the cold on Sunday and Monday. They had to watch from the hotel rooms that some of them went into debt. Others I'm not talking about the millionaire people who came here on jets, including many of them January 6 people who got pardons. No, I'm talking about the people who didn't have the money to come here in the first place. And I'm listening to them. And in that moment, I felt for them. These are not enemies. You don't know no black. If you know black people, you probably got a decent relationship with them. Maybe you don't. You may call them nigga, but you don't do it to their face. But these are people here. You don't know me. I'm sitting there reading New York Times. I'm sure you're looking at me like that's one of them liberals, but you ain't say it to my face. Why? Because everybody serving you the food is Asian. Them eggs that they just went up on again, that you're gonna go up on again by the time you get back on your plane or bus or however you got here and go back to your house, you eating them now. And you sitting in here and they were lamenting. Oh yeah, well, we couldn't go to, they moved the inauguration, so we just kind of stayed around in the hotel. And then we've been walking around. But in that lament, then the enthusiasm came out. Yeah, but it's good. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. It's great. Blood called blood, and somehow blood answered. And this is what Gerald has been saying has forestalled class solidarity in the last 500 years. Whiteness became more valuable. James Baldwin talks about this too. Whiteness became more valuable than their literal lives. Yeah, I spent money I don't have. Yeah, I went into debt. Yeah, my prescription drug price is about to go up because even as I'm sitting here eating this breakfast food, demanding sign something that ensures that I'm going to go deeper in debt. Yeah, the draws at Walmart and the groceries about to triple in price. Yeah, he said he's going to have a tariff, and you understand that there is no such thing as taxing other countries. You're going to pay that tax, Morris. You're going to pay that tax, Bubba. You're going to pay that tax, Irene. Yeah, all that's happening, but it's a beautiful day. I feel like it's a beautiful day. So that whole notion of opposition as grounding. Fred Gray says, I'm going to test and destroy everything segregated. Fred Gray, who practices law right with not far from where I'm sitting right now. Even as they did that, as my student said, the testing of the boundaries reveals the limitations of the boundaries. You've got to overflow it. You've got to overflow it. And that African memory will wash out the European worship that often looks like it's black worship. It's not, it's European worship. And so blood called blood, blood answered. But guess what? We're in Hell Week and the transition is right in front of us. Musk salute his guests at the inauguration. Important things to discuss, but not to center. The thumbnail sketch of the executive orders, you know, Donald Trump telling his little friend on Fox, Sean Hannity, when Hannity's like, let's talk about the Condi. I don't care. What's important is Joe Biden. He pardoned everybody but himself. Okay, the next news cycle, he's going to try to prosecute Biden. Biden's going to evoke the same Supreme Court decision that said to Trump, do whatever the hell you want. The Sotomayor and Jackson and them tried to stop. By the way, people saying Ketanji Brown Jackson, who wore this beautiful cowrie necklace and earrings to the inauguration because she had to be there, but put that spirit force out and say, yeah, she did that, but she married to a white man. Oh, follow you around for 24 hours a day. You don't want to do that. See, the whiteness call is coming from inside the house. And it's easy to project onto somebody else and say, wait, she's not great. And you keep citing the same employment discrimination case to say that Ketanji Brown Jackson isn't fighting for you, revealing again the vomiting out the ignorance, the memes. Read the entire body of her work. Read the text that she wore into that room. Understand, yeah, she married a white man. And you ain't ever kissed no white man, huh? Or no white woman, huh? You never desired it in your heart, huh? You never let your humanity overflow the boundaries of your racialization, huh? See, destroying the concept of race means destroying the concept of race, not the executive orders that reinforce whiteness as the true affirmative action, like the things he signed this week to talk about getting rid of DEI, as Ajwa said on Urban View with me and Lamont the other day. You know, the whole idea of displacing equity and preserving white maleness, which is what all of those executive orders are trying to do, Christopher Rufo. Those executive orders are distractions. They need to be critically analyzed and then moved on from. White nationalism is a vibe. Blood calls blood. Blood sometimes answers. There are there are three categories of those executive orders. The first are the spectacles. I'm signing the one that says there are only two genders in America. You ain't no king. You're testing the limits, which reveal the limitations. You're not a king. I don't care how much the boy that looks like a living version of Ernie from Sesame Street, the MAGA Muppet Mike Johnson, tells you that he has fealty to you. Because now what you're revealing, Mike, is that there aren't three branches of government. There's only power and those without it. And you're trying to merge the executive branch with the legislative branch. You see the United States Senate voted to confirm white nationalist, a white Christo-fascist nationalist, Hegsmith, as the Secretary of Defense overnight. And they took Junior Varsity Vance to come in and break the tie because three Republicans sided with the Democrats. You know why? Because they realize what's up next. You're testing the limits of America. And guess what? You're going to find the limitations of America, whether it be tariffs or trying to send your army all over the world, an army that has a plurality of non-whites. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of police officers. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of military cats that are down for it. But this crisis is going to reveal that there are going to be many who are not, including some here right now. The first category is spectacle. That ain't got no effect. You can't change it, but it is a vibe that sends a message. Blood calls blood, and somehow blood always answers. Number two of the three are the substantive executive orders, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, withdrawing from the Paris Climate accords, prescription drug price caps eliminated, DEI cuts, cuts to prescription drug prices. As I said, Medicaid costs, those things now to be spiraled by executive order banning the renewal of private prison contracts, immigration orders, stopping people from applying for legal citizenship in this country. All those things are substantive. This is the category all the people who want to say that both parties are the same are going to have a difficult time explaining, but they ain't going to spend a whole lot of time talking with y'all. Going to cry for you, try to continue to educate and keep it moving. But the third category is perhaps the most dangerous in some ways, and that's the one that combines spectacle and substance. That's the saying we're revoking birthright citizenship. People say you can't do that. It's in the Constitution. Yeah, understand the 14th Amendment saying people who are born here and not subject to other jurisdictions are citizens. They're hanging their hat on the second part of that. And they're going to make the argument that, yeah, you were born here, but your parents weren't subject to the jurisdiction. It's a stupid argument. It should be an illegal argument, but the fact that judges will have to interpret it reveals the real danger here, which is what? You'll get enough judges on the bench to read the 14th Amendment that way. It's probably not going to happen. But again, in a crisis of white supremacy, absurdity intensifies. We're in hell week now. The Proud Boys leader called for retribution, says that January 6th should be Patriots Day. We are in hell week now. Trump signs pardons for two killers. You chase a DC, which is subject to the Fifth, not the 14th Amendment, because it's not a state. So these two boys chasing this man on a scooter through DC in a high-speed chase. The boy gets hit by a car, killed, and these two guys are convicted. And then Donald Trump pardons him, and they stand in there. Don't worry about him pardoning Derek Chauvin, at least not for the state charges of George Floyd. But it sends a message, these both spectacle and substantive pardons. You are sending the message that everybody now is deputized to be the police. Blood calls blood. Somehow blood must answer. And guess what? How did that work out to you the last time? Do you know about the Red Summer in 1919? Oh, the white boys ready to do it? Let's dance. Do you know about Detroit and Newark in 1967? Do you understand what happens when you put all your people out in the street against all our people? I'm sitting in a place where a guy like Donald Trump or even Byron Donaldson would say, oh, Columbus, Georgia, they kill each other. They call it, the young people call it kill umbus. Oh, woe the day that it gets so clear that they turn on you instead of each other, as Amos Wilson wrote in his book, Black on Black Violence in Service of White Domination. What happens when that Black on Black violence stops? Because we're in hell week now. The idea that you will roll back a sustainable energy money to the tune of $300 billion or eliminate FEMA. The absurdities will reveal the contradictions. As my student said, you test the limits. Fred Gray tested them, we test them, and in testing them, we will reveal the limitations and we can make a serious conversation into action. This is the relationship between study and action. You act differently once you've studied it. So, Prof, I want to congratulate you. And in congratulating you, congratulate everybody else here for something that was a long time coming, something that has nothing to do with deserves, not deserves, because it's part of a framework that in testing it revealed its limitations, something that I'm sure our friend and brother, Dr. Julius Garvey, spent a few minutes after being told of the decision by the Biden administration, probably spent a couple of minutes shedding a tear because he's fought for this most of his adult life. The pardon for Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Baba Oz wore his get up and do shirt on Monday night in the office hours. Ivy talked about it and she revealed some of the behind the scenes work. Again, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, former Congressman Cedric Richmond, so many others. And I just want to say as I close here and join the conference that, the hell week for Marcus Garvey, the torturing of his reputation, his jailing in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, not far from here, his deportation from the United States, the hardships his wife and sons had to endure after his death in 1940 in England. None of that is washed from the ledgers. And that pardon doesn't mean a renewed faith in America. What that pardon represents is not something that Joe Biden signed because he was so gracious. It represents the organized power of people to test the boundaries, reveal the limitations, transcend those limitations, and remember that after Hell Week, the dawn comes. And I just want to, acknowledge you and acknowledge all the people who did work beyond saying it should happen, but who actually took action as a result of studying the case. So, stuff from there.
Yeah, I want to say this. That was collective, right? you know,
Yes.
and we have to
Yes.
stop with, and I know it's important to put people in positions of praise who have done a thing, but
Hmm.
things only get done because of the collective, right? To be in a position to have an audience or a platform to elevate a conversation, I think is a requirement, right? Too much is
Mm.
it's a requirement. This is not self-aggrandizement. We don't have platforms so we can have more followers and likes so we can make more money. We have followers. We have platforms so that we got followers who can make things happen. And if you're
Yes.
not doing that, if your platform is only to serve yourself, then
Mm.
we who support these people, we should like, why am I supporting somebody that's not doing the work? So
That's right.
that's a requirement to, you talked with Ajwa about that, who work behind the scenes. Like it's a multifaceted thing. Like the flag coming down in South Carolina. Yes, there was a petition. Yes, 577,000 people signed it. But then there were people behind the scenes, there were politicians, there were folk that have been fighting that fight for decades, maybe a half a century,
Yes.
and that was the inflection point, the killing of those 7 beautiful people in Charleston in
Yes.
that church. So like there's always these dominoes. It's not one person, it's not one Socrates or Plato. That we uplift these people and give them quotes, but it's all of us,
It's all of us.
all of us. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
moving forward, we are not going to get there without that mentality. So I just wanted to say
Yes.
that. And
Yes. Absolutely.
I'm
And,
with
I don't have any. I agree with you 100%. I and we both know, and you know this because very intimately, because out of that collective representative moments, whether it be the first principal of this high school, whether it be John Clark coming out of those farm fields in Alabama, or whether it be Karen Hunter saying, I will take the responsibility of getting it started. At every key moment, there are people who are relied upon to step up, and then the collective surrounds them, the collective produce them. And I just want to acknowledge as well that it takes sacrifice, and now people are lining up to realize what's at stake, and that means that the sacrifice that you've already laid out, that all of us in one way or another lay out, it's lining up to be even greater, because there are going to be more people come running and saying, wait, we need a Twitter, wait, what's narrative? And then it's like, wow, now I'm already working 24 hours 7 days a week.
right,
I mean,
right.
so I want to acknowledge what that does, you know what I'm saying? So
But let's also remind ourselves that Dr. Bernice King reminded us that her father died unpopular.
yes, yes,
The
yes, yes,
sacrifice you're
yes.
talking about is you're not going to have the likes and the followers.
No,
That may not come till you close your eyes and then people realize, oh, work was being done.
that's
Let's
right.
let's make a holiday.
That's
But in
right.
the midst of it, Black people weren't supporting King. Everybody marched with him. We talked about this many times,
Right.
but y'all weren't there
You
when that
weren't
man
there.
was getting firebombed and stabbed, and watermelons thrown at him and tomatoes and things.
Oh,
Nobody wanted that smoke. You
no,
want the benefit, you want the fruit, but the labor.
but the labor.
But you don't do the labor in the midst of it for that, right? So that's the other conundrum or paradox, right? People who are
Yes,
working, they're working because it needs to be done. They're not
that's right.
thinking about the
That's right.
praise and what will come. It's just like, oh, this needs to get done. Let's get it done. Oh, people following. Okay, good, good. Here's something
Yes.
to do. Do this. you know. On that note, we both are you are serving today. I am going to be self-caring today. And
Self-care is a form of service.
okay.
Marion David, who usually wrote the early curriculum for what became Children's Defense and Freedom Schools, she used to talk about sustaining the self that serves.
Mm,
So it's not like you would take a moment to breathe just to continue, just to do that from now on. No, I'm coming back because it's been hell week. So please, for all of us, please do that. Because I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm gonna tell y'all in public. I said, you know, I ain't had no chitlins since the last time I was down here with John Henry Clark. We're going to his gravesite on tomorrow. I will probably not have any today,
okay.
but I ate so much fried fish yesterday at Sharks in downtown Columbus, Georgia, when we finally got. And if a chipling is placed in front of me tomorrow, I'm not sure that I won't at least have a fork, because I ate a lot of chitlins when I was a child from people who cooked them right in this neighborhood. And so I'm not saying I'm gonna do it but just as a moment of reflection and reminder that we are here because the people who had no choice but to eat them chitlins. I'm not, so I'm just saying to me, that's also self-care.
Okay.
Community is self-care. You know what I'm saying?
That's
I
right.
mean, so you please go somewhere and don't listen to none of us. Go sit with some things because we know we're gonna hear some of it next week on the radio. And again, that's it. So thank you.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you. I love you. So let's
Yeah, I love you too. I love you. Said don't do it. Kelly said don't do it. Yeah, oh, there he is. Let me see.
eat them chitlins. Eat
No,
them
I won't
chitlins.
be a lot, just a little fork, man. I'm not anyway, let me stop.
Have a good presentation, and
Thank
everybody
you.
there wishing you safe travels as well. And everyone
Indeed,
have a
indeed.
great weekend. Love you, Dr.
Thank you. Love you too, Professor Hunter.